Hey there, and welcome to our video on layer styles, also known as layer effects. Now, you can use these layer styles or layer effects to have your layers give a little bit more of a three-dimensional appearance. Now, if you're interested in layer styles or layer effects, we actually have an entire pro tutorial called How to Master Layer Styles. It goes super in-depth and gives you a lot of great examples on how you can use this. Now, to start off with, let's go ahead and open up our sample images. We're just going to double-click here in the background of Photoshop and go up to, we just have one image in this case, layerstyles1.jpg. So let's go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to hit F for full screen. Now, I just want to create some text here on the right-hand side of the image and give it a little bit of a shadow, kind of make it look like it's floating off of the page. So I'm going to hit T for the type tool. There we go. And I'm just going to type in journal. Let's go ahead and click here again. All right. Entry 1. Looking great. So let's go ahead and take our journal. I'm going to go to Window and down to Character. There we go. I'm going to change the font weight here to bold, and we're just going to increase our size quite a bit. All right. There we go. That looks pretty good. Again, this is just for example purposes. Now let's go ahead and grab our Move tool. I'm going to just bring our Entry 1. We're going to bring that up right about there. Hold Control or Command and click on both of those layers and then just left align them. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have our type here, let's go ahead and start discovering our layer styles, also known as layer effects. So to get to your layer styles, you can just double click right here in this gray part of your layer. This will bring up your layer styles. Or you can go to FX and down to blending options, which will also open your layer styles. So we're going to start with a general overview of our layer styles. So here at the top, you're going to see your blending options. You can change things like your blend mode if you'd like, which we covered in our last section. You can change the opacity of your layer as well as the fill. And if you guys remember your fill opacity, let's go ahead and add a quick drop shadow. There we go. Your fill opacity will change what is actually on your layer. It'll change the visibility of your layer, but it'll keep your layer effect or your layer style visible. So regular opacity will change both, and fill opacity will just change what's on your layer. Okay? These sliders here, opacity and fill opacity, these are the exact same as these right over here. Okay, next you have other options for things like blend, bevel, and emboss, where you can choose different ways of highlighting and adding shadows to one side of your layer. Now, a stroke is going to add a line right around your layer, so you can choose what size you'd like your stroke to be and also the color, and of course you can choose how it blends into your layer or your image using your different blending modes. So there are a ton of options with every single one of these layer styles. We can add an inner shadow. There we go. Let's just turn both of those off. Now our inner shadow, let's go ahead and set this to multiply, set our color nice and dark. Here we go. And we can see we can have a shadow on the inside of our letters, making it look like the letters are going into the page itself. Let's just turn our drop shadow off because I was kind of ruining that effect. But here we can see now we have basically the letters look like they're being pushed into our page. Okay, we have effects like inner glow. Let's go ahead and change our blending mode to screen and our color to white. And we can choose to have our, there we go, our glow. You can see in this case, it's coming from the edge. You can have this be from the center as well. So it can kind of glow in from the center outwards as well. Okay, we have options for gradient overlays. Let's just set this back to normal blending mode here. There we go. And increase our opacity. So basically pop a gradient right on top of that. And you can change directions as well as change your styles. There we are. You can add a pattern overlay right on top of your image. So in this case, there are many patterns that are loaded with Photoshop by default. So you can change your pattern and you can change the scale of your pattern as well. You can add what's known as an outer glow, which just puts a glow right on the edge. Now in this case, we won't be able to see it really that well because, well, maybe we will. Yeah, or you can see it. If our background was totally white, we wouldn't have been able to see it, but in this case we can. And then we've already looked at a drop shadow. There we go. So basically, as you can see, these layer styles are used to help add a little bit more of a three-dimensional appearance to your layers, and there are a ton of great uses for it, and again, we have a pro tutorial that goes over all of this stuff. So in this case, let's go ahead and try to create a realistic drop shadow for this text. I want to make it look like it's actually floating above the page, and we'll show you how to copy a layer style from one layer to another. So here we are, right down here. Let's just hit cancel there. We're going to go back to the original. Let's go to FX, and I'm going to go down to drop shadow. Okay, so our first drop shadow, and you'll notice there are little plus icons. Some of these layer effects will actually allow you to create multiple versions of that effect. Drop shadow is one of those, so you can create a few different drop shadows if you'd like. So let's go ahead and start with our first drop shadow. Now I'm going to just hold Alt or Option and click Reset, which is just going to reset it to the standard defaults. Okay. Now, if I want this to look kind of like our image, I'm just taking a look at the shadows that are in our image, and it looks like the light source is kind of coming from the top of the image here. So I'm going to take my angle and just bring that just straight up here. I'm going to type in 90 degrees. That looks really good there. Now, we can change our distance. This is basically like how far this is going to look like it's floating above our text. Let's go ahead and bring that down a little bit. We can change the opacity. Again, I'm just kind of trying to look at this shadow here and replicate it as best I can right over here. And your size basically just shows like, you know, a harder or softer shadow. Okay, and I think that looks really great. Now, one big piece of advice I have whenever you're creating a drop shadow especially is to create multiple drop shadows, because oftentimes a shadow will be darker, like right next to the object, and it'll get lighter and lighter and lighter. So I like to make a dark drop shadow like right next to the object, and then another one that's just a little bit lighter. So in this case, this will be our lighter drop shadow. Okay, I'm going to add a second one, and this is going to be darker. So let's go ahead and bring our opacity all the way up. Distance, size, and spread, we're going to bring those down. Bring our distance up just a tiny bit, and our size up a little bit as well. There we go, and that's looking pretty good. Now our opacity is still way too much, so let's go ahead and bring that down just a little bit. Bring our distance down as well, and there we go. We're starting to look pretty good. So we can see that both of these drop shadows combine to create a little bit more of a realistic effect. I think we can lower our opacity just a little bit more on that one as well. Perfect. So let's hit OK, and you can turn these off or on at any time here on your layers. And if you want to make any adjustments, just double click right there on the effect, and then you can change your settings. Perfect. I think that looks really great. So there's our drop shadow on this layer. Again, you can turn it off or on with the effects. Now, if you like the drop shadow or like the effect that's on your layer, you can also duplicate this to another layer. So to do that, hold Alt or Option and click and drag on this little FX. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click and drag from FX right up here, and you're going to see basically it just copies those exact settings from one layer to another. Now this is totally non-destructive, and this effect happens in real time. So if I just change this journal to my journal, okay, there we go, you're going to see that the drop shadow will update as well. Let's go ahead and bring these to the left there. Okay, so all of these effects happen at the same time. Now, my journal, there we go. Let's go back to our letters, and I'm just going to choose a color here. Let's see, just kind of poking around my image to see these different colors. Maybe like a light gray, something like that. There we go. Or maybe this light, I like that. Generally, whenever I'm doing this sort of effect, I like to kind of pull colors from my images themselves. I just find it's a little bit more fun. Alright, now let's do the same thing here. We'll actually leave the color there, but in this case, I made this text a little bit lighter, so now I'm like, okay, you know what? I think our drop shadow needs to be a little bit lighter as well. It's not a problem, just double click right here on your drop shadow. Okay, and in this case, we can do a few things. We can change the opacity, but we can also change the color of this. So let's go ahead and click on the color, and I'm going to choose the color that's actually in my layer. There we go. And now we're actually using a drop shadow that's based on the color on your layer. So you can see as I change my color, It's pretty subtle. Let's just zoom in there. As I change my color, you can see it starts to echo the color of your choice. So obviously shadows and light are not just black and white. So it can be actually really beneficial to choose colors that are actually in your image. There we go. And of course you can choose darker versions of those colors as well. There we go. And that's most of the time going to give you a little bit more of a realistic result. Alright, so let's just undo that a couple times. There we go. So here's before. Basically this shadow is just two drop shadows that are, the color is set to black. And then here's the after. These colors are set to match. So you can see it makes a big difference and it makes it look a lot more realistic. So let's go ahead and do the same thing with this entry 1. So double click here on this drop shadow. Okay, our color, let's just pull directly from our type. You can make it a little bit darker. There we go. We'll do the same thing here. Alright, looking good, and let's just go ahead and lower the size and lower the distance just a little bit on this one. Alright, very nice. And you can see now we have a much more realistic result. So obviously with all these type of effects you can go totally something like Space Age, or you can create things a little bit more realistic. Now if you do come to a layer style that you actually like, you're like, oh man, that looks great, I want to go ahead and save this, it's really easy to save these layer styles out as well. Simply double click right here on Effects to get back to your layer style, and then go to New Style. And we're just going to call this Drop Shadow 1. There we go, and hit OK. So if you ever want to get back to this style, you can click here on your styles on the very top left, and right down here in the bottom, this is Drop Shadow 1. Now you'll notice there are some styles that are preloaded within Photoshop, and you can load in more if you'd like. For instance, if you click on this little gear icon and go to Glass Buttons and hit Append, it's going to add some glass button styles. So we can click here. You know what? Let's go ahead and save this one. This My Journal. There we go. Let's go ahead and add this new style. I'm going to just call this Drop Shadow 2. There we go. Go back to our styles. And here we can see if we want to use some of these presets that are loaded into Photoshop, these will actually completely change the style of your layer. Now most of these are kind of like not really that useful. I don't know. I mean, there may be some cases when this is like totally appropriate, but you'd be hard pressed to find them. So generally I suggest keeping things a little bit more subtle, but you can get an idea of what layer styles actually do. And in this case, this layer style involves bevel and emboss, stroke, inner glow, color overlay, outer glow. All of these different things are put together for this layer style. But thankfully I just saved my layer style, so I'll just click right there and hit OK, and we're good to go. Now there's one more dialog within your layer styles. It's called Luminance Blending, also known as Blend If, and it's a super powerful tool that will help you blend layers with the underlying layers. So just real quick, I'm going to show you an example of how it works. So here on a new layer, there we go. I'm just going to create a couple of, there we go, couple of selections here. We're going to hit Shift Delete, and I'm going to fill this one with black. There we go. I'm going to hit Shift Delete, and we're going to fill this one with white, and we'll do one more that's a color. Shift Delete, and we'll fill this with a color. That looks pretty good, and hit OK. So luminance blending you can get to by double clicking on your layer or go to FX. It's right here on the bottom of your blending options. Okay, let's just make sure we can see everything. The screen is getting a little bit filled up. There we go. Okay, now here's how luminance blending works. It's, again, you can see it, it's called Blend If right here. Basically you have two sliders. The slider at the top will show you basically what's based on this layer. It'll change what's visible based on the light information. So here you can see as I bring this slider from the left to the right, the darker areas start to disappear first, and then the midtones, and then the lights. Going from the other way, your lighter areas are going to disappear, and then your midtones, and then your darks. So that's just based on the information that's on this layer itself. Now where this tool gets a little bit more powerful is the underlying layer. So as I drag this from the left to the right, it's going to start to disappear from the darker areas of my photo. And you can see in this case it's just disappearing from wherever my little notebook is. Now if I go from the other way, it's going to start to disappear from the light areas and show up in the darker areas. Okay, so again, the layer on the top doesn't take a look at anything else. It's just based on what's light and dark on this layer, and the underlying layer is just based on what's underneath it. Now, as you can see, it's a little bit kind of like grainy and fuzzy. It's not that usable. To make this more usable, just hold down Alt or Option, and it'll actually separate out these little sliders. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option and separate out these sliders. There we go. And you can see we're getting a feathering effect that just looks a lot more natural. There we go. And you can see we have a much more natural fade from light to dark. Alright, now we have the same thing on the other side. If I hold Alt or Option, we have the same effect coming from the other side. My dog's running over there. So if I hold Alt or Option, we have the same effect coming from the other side, going from light to dark. There we go. And we can see we have a little bit more of a natural effect. So you can use this tool for many different things, basically to allow one layer to blend into the layers underneath it based on light value. Well, there we have it, guys, our layer styles as well as luminosity blending. So in our next video, we're going to show you how to lock different parts of your layers and how to actually use this to create some interesting effects in your images. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.